Today, in the never-ending onslaught of drama, we have a new contender, and that is Doom. Now, Doom is a franchise pretty much everyone knows about. The original Doom, 99% of you weren't even born when that came out. Doom 2, which was building on the original. Doom 3, which was basically a corridor walking simulator with dark corners and enemies that would one-shot you. But then, Doom 2016 came around, and it changed everything. It did the complete opposite of corridor simulator Doom 3 by giving you these huge open arenas, and everything was incredibly fast-paced. But in that game as well, you would pretty much always be one-shot. But then, in 2020... Doom Eternal came out, which did exactly what Doom 2016 did, but even better. That game was amazing, and I'm not talking about the enemy placement, the variety, the maps, the locations, more just because they removed the shitty starting pistol you had in Doom 2016 that even fully upgraded would kill someone in about 3 weeks as opposed to 3 months. Now, Doom 2016 and Doom 2020 were both great games and financially successful, but something was bubbling beneath the surface. A bit of drama, mostly surrounding Mick Gordon, the game's composer. Now, to say this guy is talented would be a complete understatement. This guy could play the tuba and make it sound like heavy death metal. But now Mick has came out publicly to say that the soundtrack to the game, as amazing as it is, was a complete nightmare to make. Now, Mick did what most people do and dropped this bombshell on Twitter. I swear I've said that sentence about 5 times. This happens so frequently now, it's not even funny. The document goes on to say Mick was very mistreated and even offered a 6-figure sum of hush money to essentially take all blame and act like nothing ever happened. Now, the thing is, reading this document, it is like an hour-long read, and I'm sure you guys have more important things to do, like say a slur in League of Legends, or watch a critical video talking about the exact same thing because I was late to the topic again. So what I'll do, because I'm so humble and nice, I'll try and condense it. Now, this all started back in 2020 when id's studio director Marty Stratton did a post on Reddit, basically talking about how it wasn't really anyone's fault that the soundtrack was so delayed, except Mick Gordon. Now, the length of this post is the script of like every Lord of the Rings film put together, so again, I've got to condense this one as well. Basically, reading through the post, you'll notice that Marty paints Mick Gordon, the game's composer, as nothing more than a little bitch boy. He's someone that doesn't like working up with the higher-ups, constantly moves dates around, and when promised a dedicated deadline, misses it anyway. Even saying that the music Mick made wouldn't meet the expectations of Doom or Mick's fans, which led to id Software hiring people in-house to finish the music that Mick didn't want to. And apparently the only thing Mick was concerned about is getting full credit and not crediting any of the other people that had to patch up his work. Basically, this post, comedically, it just makes Mick Gordon look like a complete asshole. With Mick even hitting back on Twitter now, saying that this Reddit post pretty much professionally ruined his career. No one wants to work with him because they think he's a complete asshole. Now, Mick said he didn't want to talk about this, and I know everyone says they don't want to talk about it and then talk about it anyway, but the fact that he was offered hush money and his career was essentially ruined after this, he has every right to fire back. Now, this document goes on to list so many things that it didn't provide for him. Like, for example, you know when you make, like, the soundtrack to a game, you'd like to know what the game's on, right? Maybe even some gameplay. Nothing. All Mick had to work with, essentially, was concept art. People were meant to capture gameplay footage for him to look at and go, okay, I know what kind of beat or tempo I'm going to make here, but they didn't even do it because half the time the build of the game was so unstable, they couldn't properly record footage for him. So this is essentially the equivalent of someone asking you to do the soundtrack of Slender Man and saying, it's a tall guy in a suit, and he's in the woods and it's scary. And the worst thing is with how bad crunching was, if Mick missed a single deadline, that would lead on to him missing another deadline. It was just a domino effect. Now, Mick kind of realized, okay, I'm kind of screwed here, so maybe I should bring up my own plan to id to see how we can, better things. He basically suggested, okay, I'm going to make some more, like, generalized music, and as the game gets more form, i.e. I have, gameplay to work with, then I'll be able to actually make more specific music. Because at the minute, Mick is already expected to make 2 levels worth of music every month. And what do you think Marty said to that totally reasonable proposition? He completely blanked Mick Gordon and acted like he never sent the email. So Mick, this poor guy, basically had to work with what he was given, which is text and concept art. This guy would pull all-nighters, sleeping under his desk just to get work done and meet goals. And then when he presents the work to id, they go, we're not happy with it. Are you surprised? This is the equivalent of asking Hans Zimmer to do the entire soundtrack for Interstellar, but the only thing you've got to reference it is a picture of WALL-E. Then at the E3 Bethesda showcase in 2019, Doom Eternal was announced with a collector's edition that would contain the game's soundtrack. And even though the soundtrack wasn't finished, pre-orders went on sale immediately. So people were buying something like this is an early access. People were buying something that doesn't even exist. Now, Mick at this point is obviously terrified. He's got like the weight of the world on his shoulders, like he's Atlas or something. So he messages Marty saying, how are you allowing people to pay for something that doesn't exist? And then he just goes, stop causing distractions. And then on the 7th of March, Bethesda, who own id and pretty much half the video game industry at this point, sent Mick a draft of the terms of agreement. Now, I'm sure you've all heard horror stories about YouTubers signing into contracts that they shouldn't do. This beats all of that by a country mile. So apparently Mick was meant to produce 12 songs, and they had final approval, and the deadline was April 16th. So he had just over a month to produce 12 songs that he didn't even know was going to get approved or not. And the only reason they're being so strict with him is because, you know, there's a thing called consumers' rights, and they realized, wait, if we sell the collector's edition and there's no soundtrack, that means people are entitled to their money back, as they should. So below Bethesda in the id offices, or as I like to call it, the third circle of hell, they were freaking out. And you know, instead of giving Mick some more time to maybe perfect the soundtrack or work on it more, they just hire an in-house guy called Chad Mossholder to fix up the soundtrack and patch up all the holes that Mick left. Now, the problem is the edits that Chad did to kind of like patch up the work, they suck. He essentially just copy-pasted pre-existing music. He didn't even crossfade any of it. I mean, you don't have to be an audio engineer. Just look at these screenshots and you can tell when the music just abruptly starts, ends, or even clips into each other. This looks like the editing timeline of when I would make an MLG video in like 2016. But then the worst thing for Mick, someone, again, who has been sleeping under his desk, by the way, pulling all-nighters, constantly crunching, you go onto who made the music for Doom, and it says Mick Gordon and Chad Mossholder, almost like it was a collaborative effort. Imagine making the whole music, you've got this company breathing down your neck, they hire some in-house guy, and then they credit him like he's done half the work. Keep in mind, Chad, I'm sure he's a nice guy. I know a guy called Chad as well, he's very nice, but this guy did not write, produce, or script any of this music. He essentially did the equivalent of copy-pasting files 7 times and calling it a day. Actually, no, you know what? That isn't the worst bit. You know the worst bit is the fact that Mick was not even paid during any of this. For 11 months straight, he was not paid anything, because the way the contract was wrote, he would only be paid once id was happy with the final product. And because of this like legal grey area of them not approving it or saying, you know, just add a little bit more, he was never paid. I think the longest I've ever had to wait for payment is when I do like a mobile sponsor or something and they wait until the next quarter, like 2 months to pay me. But imagine going 11 months. Now, after 11 months, Mick was finally paid. Most people would call that a human rights violation. The video game industry would call that actual practicing standards. But the amount of music Mick provided to them was nearly 5 hours worth. I think they only agreed on 2 hours. So he basically gave them nearly double the amount of work for absolutely no extra pay. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Mick was offered a 6-figure sum of hush money, and in return, he'd essentially do a Walter White, you got me, and admit all wrongdoing, everything was his fault, and the reason why there were delays and so many problems is solely because of him, and the company did absolutely nothing wrong, including that he would never be allowed to criticize the company ever again. Now, when Mick read the terms of the agreement, like most humans that choose violence, he said, no, go to hell. But the problem is that the damage is done. There is a Reddit post right now circulating, basically saying how much of a terrible person he is to work with, and that's got like 37,000 updates at this point, and it has more awards on the post than a Reddit post saying, today I learned showers make me smell good. I've read more into the post, and the stuff he talks about, like he would be email bombed that would crash his servers, his family would be harassed, his phone would ring around the clock with people saying they're going to kill him, kill his family. The amount of harassment he was getting was basically the calmest Modern Warfare 2 lobby. Now, there is a silver lining to this story. Mick's story's been shared a lot on Twitter. You know, the one good thing Twitter can do is share any story. Thankfully, this is a good one for once. The post itself has about 100,000 likes, and the original Reddit post, people want to delete it, but I think the mods are going to keep it up for archival purposes to just show how dishonest Marty was. He painted Mick as this, you know, complete asshole, when in reality, he did everything he was asked of. He just, you know, he's given these ridiculous crunch times. I'm just happy you guys have example 387 of how the video game industry is bad. How does Critical end these videos? Yeah, so that's it. See ya.